Doctors have taken the Hippocratic Oath throughout history, promising to prioritize their patients' well-being and do no harm. However, Dr. Marcel Petiot betrayed this vow. He is known as Dr. Satan, who promised Jews safe passage from Nazis, only to rob and murder them. The remains of 23 people were discovered in the basement of his Paris home, and he was convicted of multiple murders. He is suspected of murdering between 60 and 200 people during his lifetime, though the exact number is unknown. Despite his fame in France, many people outside of France have never heard his story. Marcel Petiot's early life was marked by internal struggles, as it is for many serial killers. Born in France in 1897, he was expelled from multiple schools throughout France for his behavior, until he graduated from a special academy in Paris in July 1915, by the age of 18. Petiot was intelligent, reading like a 10-year-old by the age of 5, but he was also a loner with a short attention span, according to his early teachers. Little is known about his early life aside from his numerous petty crimes and disciplinary issues, which included firing his father's gun in school, sexually harassing a girl in his class, and robbing a postbox, which resulted in charges of public property damage and petty theft. The charges were dropped after a psychiatric evaluation determined he was mentally ill. Petiot volunteered for the French Army during World War I and began active service in January 1916. During the Second Battle of Aisne, he suffered from a gas attack and other injuries, which caused him to experience further mental breakdowns. While in rest homes, he got into trouble for various small thefts, including taking army supplies, morphine, photographs, letters, and wallets. He served time in jail in Orleans and was diagnosed with more mental health issues at a mental hospital in Fleury-les-Aubrais. After returning to the front in June 1918, he injured his foot in a grenade explosion 3 weeks later, leading to his transfer to another regiment in September. Due to his mental and physical health problems, the Army eventually discharged him with a disability pension. Following the war, Petiot enrolled in an accelerated education program for war veterans, completed medical school in 8 months, and worked as an intern at the Évreux Mental Hospital. In December 1921, he received his medical degree and moved to Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, where he was paid for his services by both patients and government medical assistance funds. Petiot was already addicted to narcotics at the time. He earned a reputation in Villeneuve-sur-Yonne for questionable medical practices, such as supplying narcotics and performing illegal abortions, as well as petty theft. Petiot led a simple life, but he had a sports car that he drove recklessly around Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, causing several traffic accidents. Around the same time, in March 1922, Petiot clashed with the Commission to Reform over demands for new psychiatric exams to maintain his disability payments. He strongly refused to accept any disability pension to avoid what he considered an intrusive and unpleasant process. Despite his objections, he kept receiving the payments, and in July 1923, he underwent another examination. During this evaluation, doctors noted that his tongue bore scars from bite wounds suffered during epileptic seizures. Nevertheless, his disability rating was reduced to 50%. In 1926, Marcel Petiot surprised his neighbors when he began a passionate relationship with a young woman named Louise Delaveau. She happened to be the daughter of one of his elderly patients, Madame Fleury. Shortly after this affair started, the Fleury home was burglarized and set on fire. At first, no one connected these events, but suspicions arose when Louise disappeared in May 1926. Some neighbors remembered seeing Petiot loading a large trunk into his car, similar to one found in a river weeks later. Shockingly, this second trunk contained the dismembered remains of an unidentified young woman. Despite these alarming circumstances, the police briefly searched for Louise and then dismissed her as a runaway. It's quite possible that Louise may have been Petiot's first murder victim. After Louise disappeared, Petiot surprised everyone by running for mayor of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne. The election was marked by bitterness and reached a climax in July 1926 when Petiot used an accomplice to disrupt a political debate with his opponent. After Petiot finished speaking, his partner cut the power to the auditorium, causing a blackout in the entire village and starting several fires. Despite the chaos, Petiot won the election by a large margin. His opponent later told the authorities that Petiot had bragged about faking insanity to avoid military service. However, when officials re-evaluated Petiot's case, they still believed he was mentally unstable, and they thought his claims of pretending were just more signs of that instability. Petiot's kleptomania was widely known, and as mayor, he was suspected of stealing money from the town's treasury, a local band's bass drum, and even a stone cross he had previously considered an eyesore. Opinions about him were divided, with some despising him and others considering him the best mayor ever. Petiot, on his part, attributed all criticism to his political rivals. In the following year, Petiot tied the knot with Georgette Lablais, a 23-year-old woman who happened to be the daughter of a prosperous landowner and butcher from Seinlay. Their son, Gerhardt, was born in April 1928. 8 months after their happy event, Petiot faced allegations of stealing cans of oil from Villeneuve-sur-Yonne's railroad depot. Although he had legally purchased the oil, he committed fraud by falsely claiming he hadn't received the shipment and demanded a refund. In early 1930, a court in Sens fined him 200 francs and sentenced him to 3 months in prison. This led to his suspension as mayor for 4 months. However, he later appealed the conviction and had it overturned. On October 18th, he achieved victory, becoming the youngest of 34 general councilors representing the Yonne district. His time in this role was chaotic, marked by an accusation of stealing electricity from the village of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne in August 1932. During his trial the following year, the judge dismissed Petiot's defense as pure fantasy and sentenced him to 15 days in jail and a 300-franc fine. The appeal process extended for a year, ultimately upholding Petiot's conviction but suspending the jail sentence and reducing his fine to 100 francs. Although the conviction cost Petiot his council seat, it didn't have much impact since he had relocated his family to Paris in January 1933. In Paris, Petiot was an enthusiastic self-promoter, offering a range of treatments to his patients and boasting about credentials, claiming credentials both real and imaginary. His advertisements portrayed him as an intern at a mental hospital, even though he had been an intern patient there. He went so far as to display a brass plaque outside his home office at 66 Rue Caumartin, filled with false endorsements, which led to a complaint from another physician to the Medical Association. As a result, Petiot had to remove the plaque. In September 1939, the lives of all French citizens were profoundly affected when German forces invaded Poland, triggering the start of World War II. Polish resistance crumbled by October, leading to a 7-month period known as the Phony War between France and Germany. The conflict escalated with the Nazi invasion of Denmark and Norway in April. In May, German troops moved into Holland, Belgium, and France. By June 1940, the French commander of Paris declared the city an open city, and it was subsequently occupied by German forces. Just 2 weeks later, a collaborationist French government under Marshal Philippe Pétain was established in Vichy, issuing orders for a general ceasefire. On June 22, 1940, around 40,000 French soldiers surrendered, while the resistance began arming and preparing for years of guerrilla warfare. During the Nazi occupation of Paris, Dr. Petiot saw new opportunities and decided to follow and imitate the Nazis in pursuit of his most significant and deadly plan yet. Shortly after the Nazi occupation of Paris, he started issuing fake medical certificates to Frenchmen who were drafted for forced labor. Additionally, Petiot seemed to have treated ill and injured workers who had been sent back to France from Germany, gathering valuable information about Nazi troop movements and weapon advancements. He established a network called Flytox, named after a popular insecticide, as informers were called flies, which conducted surveillance on Gestapo headquarters in Paris to identify collaborators. This information allowed resistance teams to eliminate these collaborators. Starting in 1940, Petiot's main operation was helping people escape. He welcomed various people, including Jews, resistance members, and even petty criminals, as long as they could pay his fee of 25,000 francs per person. In exchange, Petiot guaranteed safe passage to South America, providing all the required travel documents. In 1941, he bought the house at 21 Rue Le Sueur, which served as a way station for his personal underground railroad. Among Petiot's early clients were two Parisian criminals, Joseph Riocreux and Adrien Estebetegui, who had started robbing people while posing as fake Gestapo agents. Both were wanted by the French and German police. Riocreux sought Petiot's help in September 1942, along with his mistress Claudia Chamoux and another couple, François Albertini and Annette Bassett. They paid the fee and entered 21 Rue Le Sueur, never to be seen again. In March 1943, Estebetegui and his girlfriend did the same. Petiot later claimed he had killed all of them, labeling them as Nazi collaborators, and said it was his patriotic duty. What actually happened was truly horrifying. The reality of what occurred is incredibly disturbing. Dr. Petiot, under the pretense of giving his victims vaccinations required by the Argentine government, injected them with cyanide, robbed them of their money and possessions, and disposed of their bodies by using quicklime, burying them, or throwing them into the Seine River. By April 1943, the Gestapo had heard rumors about an organization arranging secret crossings into Spain using fake Argentinian passports, claiming passengers would travel on neutral ships departing from a Portuguese port. In reality, none of these passengers ever made it out of Paris alive. A Gestapo agent named Robert Jodcom forced a French Jew named Ivan Dreyfus to approach the network for passage, but Dreyfus, too, vanished in May 1943. Between 1942 and 1943, dismembered bodies, including heads, thighs, and other mutilated body parts, were discovered in the Seine River. French authorities and coroners had difficulty identifying most of them. Meanwhile, the Gestapo was more focused on preventing Jews and resistance fighters from escaping to safety. They had been monitoring Petiot's Flytox network, and by May 1943, they were prepared to take action. At first, Petiot disposed of bodies by throwing them into the Seine, but later he resorted to more gruesome methods like using quicklime or incineration. He used a telescope lens to view victims inside the death chamber. On March 11, 1944, residents living near Petiot's house on Rue Le Sueur reported a terrible smell in the area and noticed significant amounts of smoke coming from the house's chimney. Concerned about a potential chimney fire, the police called in firefighters. When they entered the house, they discovered a substantial fire burning in a coal stove located in the basement. Within the flames and scattered throughout the basement, they found human remains. In addition to the remains found in his basement, there were human remains discovered in a pit partly filled with quicklime in the backyard and inside a canvas bag. Inside his house, authorities found enough body parts to identify at least 10 victims. The property was also littered with suitcases, clothing, and other items belonging to his victims. For 7 months, Petiot hid with friends, telling them that the Gestapo was pursuing him because he had killed Germans and informers. He later moved in with one of his patients, Georges Redoute, grew a beard, and used different fake names. During the liberation of Paris in 1944, Petiot took on the identity of Henri Valéry and joined the French Forces of the Interior, FFI, as they fought to liberate the city. He held the rank of captain and was responsible for counter-espionage and interrogating prisoners. When a newspaper called Resistance published an article about Petiot, his former defense attorney from a 1942 narcotics case received a letter from Petiot, denying the allegations in the article. This letter gave the police a clue that Petiot might still be in Paris. Finally, on October 31st, Petiot was recognized at a Paris metro station and arrested. Among his possessions were a pistol, 31,700 francs, and 50 sets of fake identity documents. Petiot was incarcerated in La Santé prison and maintained his innocence, asserting that he had only killed enemies of France. He claimed to have stumbled upon the pile of bodies in 21 Rue Le Sueur in February 1944, believing them to be collaborators executed by members of his supposed resistance network. However, the police investigation revealed that Petiot had no connections with major resistance groups. Some of the resistance organizations he mentioned had never existed, and there was no evidence to support any of his claimed activities. Eventually, prosecutors charged him with at least 27 murders for profit, estimating his gains to be as high as 200 million francs. Petiot was found guilty and sentenced to death. On May 25, 1946, Petiot was executed by beheading. although there was a brief delay due to a problem with the guillotine's release mechanism. Before being placed on the guillotine's sliding table, Petiot issued a warning to the onlookers, saying, "Gentlemen, I ask you not to look. This will not be very pretty." At 5 a.m., the blade fell. Witnesses reported that Petiot was smiling as his head fell into the basket. He was then buried at Ivry Cemetery. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Dr. Satan who promised safe passage to desperate victims only to lead them down a path of darkness and death. This is a chilling reminder of the depths to which human evilness can sink. So, comment below your thoughts and follow for more fascinating crime stories.